My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. And you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. Just go to my email. Email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. We do a live show every Friday night at Spreaker.com. There's a chat room. You get an email notification when we put up new content. It's all free. If you go there and look up Rocky Radcliffe, he's an attorney we had on the past who was a survivor of the OSU, Ohio State University scandal. And today we have Steve Snyder Hill, who's a retired Army major. He's an author, and he's part of this group, Survivors of OSU.com. He's also written a book called Soldier of Change. But check out Rocky Radcliffe, and then we're going to get some more details here on Steve Snyder Hill. Mr. Snyder Hill, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Tell us about yourself. Who is Steve Snyder Hill?
That's kind of a complicated question. I'm kind of a normal person who had a career in the military and I joined the military in 1988. So I've been in the military for quite a long time and then retired in 2019. While I was in the military, I had kind of a crazy thing happen to me because I was serving in Iraq. And it was a time that the presidential debates were on TV, and they were saying that they were going to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell at the time, and I'm gay, so it was very, very important for me what was happening, but some of the Republican candidates had come on TV and said that they were going to kick people out and they were going to repeal it, and I just thought it was really important to get them on the record saying what they were going to do. So they had a Google debate where you could send in a question and normal people could submit questions. And I'm probably one of the first people that did it from a theater of war in Iraq and submitted a question to the GOP debate in Orlando, Florida. And it garnered a lot of attention. The audience booed me, and that caused a lot of outrage. That was kind of before current times where politics have gotten more vitriol and stuff. But back then, people were really appalled by that somebody would be serving their country and be in a theater of war and get booed. So it just became a big deal. President Obama talked about it at the time. It was on almost all the sitcoms. HBO Newsroom did an episode about it. But anyway, it kind of led to a lot of other stuff happening where I wrote the book that you had described earlier. And then OSU, Ohio State University, they were pretty enamored by it and wanted me to come and do a TED Talk for them at the Mershon Auditorium in front of 4,000 people. But not just do it, they wanted me to be the headliner of it, which is a big deal because OSU has a pretty good reputation, and anybody that does a TED Talk, it's a lot of planning, and you have to do a coach to make sure that you're going to do it appropriately and everything. And for you to be the headliner of it and for them to promote it and have you all over the face of it is kind of nerve-wracking, and I was nervous about it. But the topic of it was called The Human Narrative, and my topic, my tagline that I use in my book too is trust the power of your voice, because I really feel like that the power of your voice, you can change the world. And that's what happened, I think, in Iraq.
Let me stop you for a second. I ask a couple of quick questions. Off there, you said you were a nutritionist?
Yeah, I'm a dietitian by trade.
Dietitian.
So that's what I do in the military.
Yeah, when you told me you joined the military in 1988, that makes you about 8 years younger than me. If you look at a picture of this guy, I would guess you're like 30 years old or something, man. You look great.
I promise I didn't pay you to say that. But I definitely am. I'm getting up there. So
well, God bless you. No, you look great.
I tell people that I joined in '88, and they're like, "I wasn't born for 10 more years or something." You're like,
right. Now, so before we get into OSU, in your experience in the military, did you suffer discrimination? Was there problems?
It was a difficult time,
Really?
I think, during the era of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, because to the public, it was a great, and to gay people, I think, in the general, it was a very, very good thing in the beginning because we felt like that it was our ability to serve. But what it did was it provided the military the first opportunity that they had to be able to actually discharge you for, a couple of reasons, like if they saw you at a gay bar, if you said that or if you tried to marry another person of the same sex. So there were several things that now they had the ability to kick you out for. But before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it was that you had to, when you first came into the military, you had to say that you weren't gay. And then after that, nobody really asked about it. There wasn't really a clear-cut path to just kick you out. And so it was a contentious time. So I think that it was rough. And I mean, if you do have time and want to read my book, it really goes through tons and tons of experiences I had and conversations that I had with chaplains after I came out. Because when I came out in the military on public TV or on national TV to the world, basically, because I was in Iraq when it aired too, not one person knew that I was gay. And all of a sudden everybody knew, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. I mean, that's a whole podcast in itself. It's a lot.
I agree. I'd love to have you come back on that, but one real quick question, because I see you're still passionate about this topic. What about kids today joining the military? Are they getting grief today in 2024?
No, I think that it's become a much better military.
Yeah.
When I left, I think that other gay people that were serving were better. But I think that changes with administrations. And I think that another part of my book that I didn't really talk about in my earlier discussion was that we actually were part of the first group to sue the military when gay marriage was not legal. We joined Service Members Legal Defense Network, and a group of service members, including me being deployed, sued the military to be able to change the statute that says that you have to have an opposite sex partner. And the result of that lawsuit was interesting. We actually won, but then the lawyers came back and said, look, you can get damages, you can get money from them, for your back pay or whatever, that for your spouses, or we can just tell the military, all we want you to do is change the language. And they said that was so important because for future generations, if that language remained the same, and even if something happened in law that changed, the military could always go back and try to rely on those whatever was in the military code of justice as being their statute that they follow. And we all unanimously, all the people that were suing, elected not to take a dime and to make them change that language, and they did. And that is probably one of the proudest things that I've ever done in my life, because no matter what, that's in the military code now. It doesn't say opposite sex partner anymore.
I got you, man. I still want the money, but God bless you. So that's what brought you with the... Go ahead.
I just always felt like that I was fighting for freedom for everybody else that I didn't have, and that just didn't feel right.
And we all deserve to be compensated. Now, what about this? It's this platform and this mission in life and this change to the military that brought you in contact with OSU. You said it was a human. What was the speech called again?
It was called The Human Narrative, but my portion was called Trust the Power of Your Voice.
Gotcha. This brought you in contact with OSU. Okay, then what happens there?
Well, let's reverse, and I'll tell you about what happened to me back in 1995, because that's quite a story too. Because full transparency, I'm not an athlete, so I was not a wrestler. I was not any part of most of the people that have come out as victims of Dr. Strauss. I'm completely different because I was a student at the time, and I just went to the student health center because I had a lump on my chest that I was concerned about, because people had said, males can get breast cancer just like females can, and I had a lump that bothered me, so I decided to go into this, to a doctor visit. And I didn't always have insurance. That particular quarter I did, so I was like, I like every other student, I was frugal, and, if I had insurance, I would use it, and not if I didn't. But anyway, I had insurance, so I went in, and they triaged me, and they gave me to Dr. Strauss. You've probably heard some of the OSU stories where the wrestlers, like they kind of talked to each other and they knew all the exams that they got, and they kind of, it was kind of a known issue that he would do these things to people. I wasn't. I didn't know anything. I walked in completely blind to anything. I didn't have teammates that would tell me, you got to watch out for this guy or anything. I just went in innocently for a quarter that I had insurance to get checked out. So when I went in, they triaged me. He came in. And another thing that makes me very unique from all the other survivors is I'm the only one that has an actual document that proves everything that happened at the time. And that was probably a little bit from my military background, because after this had happened, I demanded that they write me a letter. Mm-hmm. And thank God that I did, because that's the only proof anybody has, like, documented that they have that what Strauss did. But anyway, he had me in there, and he basically, like everybody else, well, I don't know how everybody else was, but he had me completely naked. He had me do a rectal and then anal and the whole works down there, exams with no gloves. And, I was like, I'm here for my chest. I don't understand. And, he just insisted that he had to do all these exams. And it was completely uncomfortable because it just didn't feel right to me. But then as he was doing them, his questioning was what really triggered me before the ultimate thing that he did. But he started asking questions like, well, first he told me he was, and this is from my memory, so it's been a long time, but I think that he said football. He was the football doctor, thinking somehow that was like a impressive thing to me or something. I don't know, because he did ask if I was gay early on, because I had told him that I worked with AIDS patients in our health department as a volunteer. And I think back in the 90s, then, unfortunately, the assumption is if you work with people with AIDS that you might be gay or whatever. So I think that might have triggered him to think that I was gay. So then he started asking me these really inappropriate questions, like, do you find it hard sleeping with one person? And just like really, really creepy stuff, why he's, has me completely naked. And so I'm totally uncomfortable. I just want out of there. I'm not, this is just, people have asked, and I've had situations where people have said, why didn't you just beat the crap out of that guy? Why, like, you guys, like all the rest, and I'm a lifter too. Like, I'm not a wrestler, but I could have, Strauss was not a big guy. I could have probably beat the crap out of him. But my always response to them is that you have no idea what it's like to be put in that situation where you go in thinking you're protected and you're safe, and somebody takes advantage of you when you're so vulnerable. And I don't care if you're a male or a female. I think that you just don't know what to do. It's just not.
It's the last thing you're going to expect. It's the last thing you're going to expect that morning. I'm going to go to the doctor, and I'm going to look at this guy's going to go
and get molested. Yeah, that's terrible. And so anyway, he has all that stuff, and then I finally said, look, I think that I'm okay. I don't need my testicles checked. I don't need, and this is after he had already done it. And it's, if you go through, like you had said, go through that complaint and read it, you'll see it. And it's the same stuff. I could feel his breath on my testicles. When he was so close to it, and that's the kind of stuff that just grates on you now that you can remember. Yeah. And just the way he did it was gross, but I'll save everybody that stuff. But anyway, ultimately what really, really kind of set me off was that he laid me down and he basically was massaging my chest, checking for the lump. And he just kept pushing his groin closer and closer to my side, and I could feel that he had an erection. And that's when I was just like, I want out of here. I don't know what to do. And he held me there so long that he could have ejaculated. I don't even know. It was just really, really disgusting. I was just really, really upset by the whole thing, and probably should have given a trigger warning to anybody that's been sexually assaulted before. Maybe you can put that, afterwards, put that in there just so that way. But it was awful, and I went home and I was really, really upset about it, and I was angry. I knew that what happened was not right. So this is, again, where my story veers from a lot of the other survivors. I'd been in the military, so I know what's right and wrong, and I know how to handle myself. So the day after this happened, I called and I complained about him and I said, I want to speak to the top person at Student Health. And so they ended up, I got Judy Brady. She wrote down all these things in my complaint, and she said, I'll have somebody call you back. Well, Ted Grace is the Strauss's boss's boss. He called me back and he said, Strauss denies all the stuff that you said, because my complaint, and I'm happy to send it to you and you can post it and let people read it. Okay. My complaint's very, 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 very detailed about every single thing that he said or whatever. And he basically said, Strauss, denies everything and whatever. And I said, well, I'm not happy because it's true. It happened to me. And he said, well, why don't you come in for a meeting with us and we'll sit down and talk. And so I was very uncomfortable. I took this person that I was dating at the time with me because I didn't know, I was a kid for all intents and purposes, And so I took this, my boyfriend at the time with me to go into this meeting. Had no idea what to expect. We walk into a room. It has Strauss. And again, I want you to think of this. In today's world, would you ever put a sexual assault survivor in front of their predator in a meeting like this? And that's what they did to me. That's what OSU did, is that they put me in there. There was a counselor. Her name's Louise Dow. She was in it. And then Ted Grace, his boss, and then the person that I brought to the meeting. And so it started really weird. Like, Strauss was very, like calm and kind and, like, shaking, my boyfriend's hand, introducing himself. And as we started to get into this complaint, he just kept, at first he was just, well, of course I asked if he was gay because that was relevant to his sexual history and blah, 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 blah. And then as he couldn't explain stuff, he started to escalate a little bit. And then when it got to where I told him that he had an erection and they pushed it against me, he slams his hand down and screamed at me in front of everybody and said, "You're trying to ruin my reputation." And he was nasty. I mean, I don't know if you've gotten that story from anybody yet, but Strauss was a small guy and he could be nice, but he could lash out nasty. And when it happened, I looked at these two doctors that I was with because I was a kid, and I'm like, scared. Like, I'm not scared of him, but I'm like, what do we do now? And they both looked kind of terrified because I don't think anybody expected that. And so basically Louise got up after this whole thing and she looked at me and said, "Well, it appears that you're just confused and mistaken about what had happened to you." And I'll never forget those words because they were basically, and I'll tell you, after that, I went home and I started thinking, my God, did I falsely accuse somebody? Like, did he have a cell phone? Well, I don't even know what I would have thought. A wallet, because back then I don't even know if we had cell phones. But did he have a wallet in his pocket? And maybe I misconfused it, and I could be ruining his life. And I second doubted myself, and that was exactly the intention of that meeting, I believe. So I was very upset. Ted Grace called me back. Now, there's a fun story about this. Ted Grace just lost his medical license in 2020, I think, because he lied to me, and I did a complaint against him. So this doctor, present day, who was still working in student health at a different university in Illinois, lost his medical license for lying to me about this, and also lost his medical license in Illinois. So this guy lost his job. I took away him being a doctor. So if anybody wants to question whether or not we're telling the truth, somebody just lost their medical license because of it. And he's the only one that has had any punishment in any of this. OSU hasn't taken any punishment whatsoever, or even really any accountability. But so Ted called me back a couple days later, and he said, "How do I make this right?" And I said, and I don't know what possessed me to think of all this stuff, but I said, I want three things from you. I want your personal guarantee that he's never done this before. I want it to be documented in his file, and if it happens again, I want you to tell me, and you should be asking this on the medical forms if people are uncomfortable with people. And so we went through all this stuff, and he said, "Sure, I can do all that." And so I said, "Great, then put it in a letter to me." And it was just silence for a second. So I think that I screwed him and this university to this day by doing that, because I think that had I not done that, I honestly think all this, including the Perkins Coie investigation, would have gone a completely different way, because I have my own beliefs about that too. But so he did. He sent me a letter that said we've had no complaints. We've only had positive comments, and we will. I remember reading it and thinking I was mad about it because he only said in it that he would consider prior complaints with future ones. And at the time, I was thinking, that's not what I asked. I asked you to call me, But he didn't offer me any other recourse, to call or appeal to anybody else. So I just stuck that letter in a basement and just forgot about it for 24 years. And then in 2018, I saw his face on TV, and that's when everything came back. And that was after I had done the TED Talk. So that kind of gives you context of, where Strauss versus the TED Talk and all that stuff.
Why do you think OSU didn't say, "Hey, we got a bad apple here, let's just swap out doctors"? It must be so easy to find a doctor to take that position.
Well, I think here's the thing. I was in the military. They have a sexual assault issue as well for the males that are there. I mean, people do. Sexual assault is definitely something that, obviously, the Catholic Church, there have been a lot of people. And I would tell my military peers that here's why you have to be really careful. And I truly believe this has a little bit to do with it, is that I would tell somebody, and I'm not going to say his name, but I would tell him, say you slap somebody in the butt and somebody, like I'll say military person one slaps a woman on the butt and says, whatever. And she comes and complains to me and says, hey, that person number one just slapped me and I wasn't comfortable with that. So then I'm faced with what do I do? So then I go to him and I say, hey, knock that crap off. Don't do that anymore. And maybe he denies it or whatever. And then I just go on about my day because I think I handled it. Then what happens if another person comes to me and says, hey, person number two just complained because this person number one did something, assaulted them or did something that was inappropriate. Now I'm screwed because I know that he did it to somebody else and I didn't say anything. Right. So now I'm an accomplice. And that's the problem that I think happens, is that I don't know if Ted Grace is a bad person or if he intended to, because I think that he came in late because Strauss in the medical center was about 94, I think he came in, and Grace came in, relatively before that. But also Grace did say that he heard Strauss had issues with this stuff because he wasn't on the Strauss had started this stuff back in the 70s on the athletic side, but he also moonlighted at this student health center. But here's the thing. 20-some years later, I see his face on TV, and then so I start digging in, and I don't find out until they release this Perkins-Coie report that a kid complained 2 days before me.
Wow.
To that same guy, complained about the same thing, and he looked me in the face and told me we've never had anything but positive complaints, and sat there and let Strauss scream at me and say, you're trying to ruin my reputation, and sat there silently while that woman said, it appears you're confused and mistaken. That's why that guy lost his medical license today. And I went after him in 2020 and filed a complaint against him because I wanted him to lose his medical license because he deserved it for what he did. But back to your question, I think that the problem is that when people think that they have got something under control, they might not realize that it could spiral out of control, and now they're an accomplice. And, I mean, there are other theories of Strauss. I mean, I know stories now that I've read everything. I'm probably one of the most foremost experts on everything that happened back then just because of everything that I've gone through. Because just like you said, I want to know why. Strauss's lawyer got a call from OSU because Strauss went in and screamed at their lawyer in her office, and she said, you can't do that. She told his lawyer, you can't have him doing this. And so he had like an anger thing to him too, that maybe they couldn't have controlled, maybe, and Grace had said in a deposition that he was actually scared of Strauss. So maybe it was intimidation. Even though Strauss wasn't a big statured person, he could get nasty. And I don't know if it was part of all that. Maybe it was, that steroid thing that people had said that he was giving steroids out, because I have survivor friends that said that he offered them steroids. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff like that. But
did he have political juice? Does this guy have like political kind of power, or?
Well, he has doctor power. I mean, when you're a physician, I think that, and I somewhere either read or heard that the position of student health was just not a coveted thing for doctors to do, and Strauss was super willing to do that. And so I think that probably they allowed him to do some stuff. I don't know, or get away with more than normal, but it was crazy.
Gotcha.
I found a document back in a student newspaper back from the 70s or 80s that Strauss wrote an article about saunas, and he basically, it's the weirdest thing to see the grooming happen. He publicly said in this article that you might see me in saunas because I'm just making sure that people are healthy and that they don't get in there too long, and you shouldn't, like the whole article was about being in saunas too long. Yeah. And he kind of said that he frequents them because he's trying to make sure people are safe. And I'm like, now knowing what I know, I'm like, that guy was grooming everybody. Like he was grooming, he was setting it up. So if you see him in there, you don't question why. And that's insane to me.
Yeah, I've heard other stories about that sauna and tongue depressors and all kind of weird stuff going on in there. You've heard those stories too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, but part of my grief with this whole thing is just that OSU, it's not only that, well, I mean, this is difficult to say. It's not only that they covered up sexual abuse and hid it for 20-some years. That's like, to me, about 10% of the evil that university has done. The other 90% is basically everything that they've done since we've come forward. And it's honestly, I mean, I'm going to lay it out for you. If you've got time.
I'm ready, yeah.
Okay, so the first guy comes forward, the whistleblower. First complaint of anybody comes forward, does a public records request, and says, hey, I think that this guy was sexually assaulting people because he had some grievances against OSU. So their first response as a university was to send him back something saying there's no responsive records. So that was their first lie right away. Nobody's ever talked about that. They've never explained why they lied about that, because there are thousands of responsive records. They're a public university that's required to give public documents out. They're required to, and they lied. Nobody's ever pressed them on that. That's the first thing that they did. Right out of the gate, just lie. So then basically when I came forward, my husband, now this is ironic, my husband actually worked at OSU at the time that I saw Strauss's face. He worked in human resources for the director of human resources, who was, they have human resources all over the university, but this was the HR of the HR. So my husband actually worked at a higher level in the human resources department, and he knew all this stuff about Strauss was going on. I had never talked about it before. I had never even told my family about this, and there was a reason, because Strauss, I suspect, was probably gay. And when this happened to me, the first protective instinct that I had is I don't want to tell my family about this, because I don't want them to think that gay people do this stuff to people. Right. And that's what I felt, and that's why I kept it, secret or whatever. And so Josh was working, and he knew all about Strauss because they were all in damage control. They shut down a whole department because of him. And he worked with the PR guy who now I'm sparring with all the time publicly. But he worked with all these people day in and day out. And when this all broke, and I told Josh, I'm like, oh, my God, that's the guy that did this to me. And I have that actual video where I saw him because we were working out, and our cameras captured it, and I just saved that video. But I couldn't believe it. I was like, that's that guy, and I couldn't remember his name. I couldn't remember even the meeting, any of the details about it. I just knew that face. I mean, I could never forget that face. And so that's when Josh was like, this is a big deal. There's a lot of wrestlers. And then I started to Google Mike DeSabato because I wanted to see what his deal was. Right. And that's when OSU was secretly kind of dispatching him because they were attacking his credit, his credibility. And so then I even questioned his credibility because of what I was reading in the media. But I did a public records request. And I said, I know that I have some documentation because I know that it's in my basement somewhere that I did a complaint, because at that point in 2018, after this broke, OSU was still telling the public that they don't have any credible evidence that this happened. That's what they were telling them. So then I come along, and I think that they were hoping that I wouldn't, because I had documentation that nobody else did. And if I didn't come and ask for it, then they never had to produce it. And trust me, based on what I'm going to tell you, they wouldn't have produced it. I'm 100% sure of that. But anyway, so I did a public records request, and they basically kind of hem-hawed about it a little bit. And then I kind of pulled the military card and said, look, I've got drill this weekend. And I said, the Perkins Coie investigators I contacted and said, I think that I might be one of this guy's victims. I complained about him, and I think I have documentation. They wrote me back right away and said, Steve, we're so glad you came forward. We were hoping you would. And I was like, what does that mean? I was like, if you were hoping I would, why didn't you reach out to me? Like, that just seemed shady to me, because I was like, if you knew what I know and you have that documentation that I want, then you should have been calling me. And they knew how to get a hold of me. I just done a great big, TED Talk for them. But anyway, so I asked for this documentation. So I did get my complaint. I had never seen the complaint. I only knew what I told them. But to see it in paper all these years later, after you've heard all these awful stories about Strauss, was just awful. I mean, it was just awful to read. Josh was reading it, and he's like, oh, my God, Steve. He's like, because I put stuff like I couldn't look him in the eye. Like, it was just, I felt bad the whole night, and just stuff like that were in my complaint. But then Ted Grace's letter that basically showed that he lied, because obviously we know, well, I didn't know that he lied then, but I knew obviously Strauss had done this before based on all these other kids. So the fact that he said we'd never had a complaint, I suspected was a lie, but I didn't know for sure when they gave it to me. So about December, Perkins Coie reached out to me and said, hey, were you in a meeting with Strauss? Because we found some documentation you were in a meeting with him. And I'll be very frank with you. At that point, I couldn't remember the meeting because it was 24 years ago, and I think that some trauma, you suppress some of that stuff.
Sure.
And so I told my lawyers, no, I wouldn't have met with him. I would have told you that, and I just didn't remember that. And so then I asked Perkins Coie for that. I said, well, can you give me documentation? Maybe that'll trigger my memory. And they're, of course, no, we can't do that. So then I did I'm always a fighter, so I did a public records request for my documentation around my meeting because they're required by law, by the Sunshine Act, they're required by law to give me that documentation. Now, they aren't required to give media some of that stuff, but this was my own documentation. They were required to. So they, 155 days, gave me BS answers where they were just like, we're working on it, we're doing all this stuff. And so I just started getting mad. And so I wrote the Board of Trustees. I copied in the media. I copied in the president of the university because they hadn't released their Perkins Coie report. And I said, you guys are liars, and somebody needs to you're breaking the law. I said, you either need to give me this documentation or you need to tell me that it doesn't exist. But this business of 155 days, I know that the kind of quote-unquote, statute of limitations for getting that paperwork to you is roughly 30 days. The law is unclear because it just says within a reasonable time, which of course is subjective, but 155 days is not reasonable. So then I threatened them, and then that night I got a FERPA waiver, and I was like, oh my God, Josh, they're going to give it to me. I can't believe it. They're going to tell me what happened at that meeting. And so the next day, I remember telling Josh before we went to bed that night, I said, how much do you want to bet Perkins Coie gets released tomorrow? Because they're going to give me my paperwork tomorrow. Mm. And I said that almost as a joke. The next day at 9 in the morning, I got my paperwork. 9:36, they released the Perkins report. And they claimed that, that was I didn't change their timeline or nothing. But that seems awfully suspicious to me that all of a sudden they released all this stuff when they knew that I would have. Because they gave me a little bit of my stuff before, but they didn't give me the stuff about my meeting and all that other stuff, because that's what told me that Grace lied to me. That's what told me that a kid before me. And it's convenient that they left off what I could put together, what they paid $6 million for their Perkins Coie report, and they completely just broke the law, broke public records law. So then I filed a complaint against them with public records and said that they broke the law and fought them in court. And I didn't even know what pro se meant. I had to Google it. That means to represent yourself, because I did. I represented myself. And they made a legal argument against me, and I fought the legal argument. I pulled up the court cases that they claimed in their argument. Like one of them was Guernsey County Sheriff's Department had, so many days to produce this. They have so many, staff or whatever. And I said, okay, that's great. By my calculation, they were asking for 93 pages. I was asking for 21. So by that calculation, they should have given it to me in 2 weeks. And so that's the kind of arguments that I'm making to the court, and I won.
Just to clarify for a second here,
OSU broke the law.
Yeah, the Perkins Coie report is an supposedly independent investigative law firm that the college hired to investigate into all these allegations.
Correct.
Right, so it wasn't part of the lawsuit.
And the funny thing is, back then they always dismissed the language that we said they're OSU's lawyers. They always dismissed that. But today, in present time, all of a sudden, they were our counsel, and that's why it's attorney-client privilege. So everything changed. They're
really?
So manipulative and Oh yeah, they basically said that's what they're fighting right now. They don't want to even include the Perkins report and any of this lawsuit, because now they're saying, and I can't make this stuff up. You please fact check me. I want your audience to fact check all this. But now they just filed in court, and they said that the Perkins Coie report that they bragged about, I have their board of trustees bragging about how they led the effort to expose Strauss when they really didn't. It was a whistleblower. But I have all this audio of them saying that, but now they just filed to the court that it's hearsay, that they can't validate any of it. It's so funny. It's so funny how everything's changed.
I really wish this story would get more publicity, because all people really know about, something went on in a locker room. There was a teacher, there was a doctor, and Jim Jordan. What happened? Did he see it? Did he didn't see it? There's so much more. Real quick, Les Wexner's wife, is she still a trustee?
I don't think she is. I think she resigned from the board. I could check that, but I don't think she is anymore. Let me see.
Yeah, because very bizarre. All this took place in the Wexner building. Okay, the guy.
Well, I mean, the thing is that is funny is that Les really does kind of own Columbus. He's very prominent in Columbus, and you don't really mess with him or the family or whatever. And so, like any kind of accusations, as a quick scan, I don't think she's on the board anymore.
Gotcha.
But she was definitely on the board while this was hot and heavy. And so I think that was part of the beef that people had, is that he was going through his own scandals with Epstein and all that stuff. But I'm pretty clear cut about stuff. When people ask me about Jordan wasn't part of my story. I mean, I think that he's extremely disliked in Columbus. Like when we protest, people will scream obscenities about him all the time. So I think he's extremely disliked, but he's not part of my story. I wasn't part of his. But the thing that I always challenge, and I can say this because there is a document from Strauss's lawyer that basically complained to OSU when all this stuff was coming out, and I can quote, it says, rumors and innuendo are rampant across the entire university campus as well as other campuses about Strauss. So he was complaining that everybody knew. Like, he's like, everybody's talking about my client, and everybody knows this stuff, and everybody's saying all these rumors. So my question to Jordan would be, if your locker's just a couple down from this guy, and his own lawyer back then was saying everybody knew, how in the heck can you say that you didn't know? I just don't know how he can BS his way out of that, But again, he's not my story.
Right.
I don't really, I personally don't care for him, but I'm not going to try to pull him into something that he's not part of me. But I definitely would ask him that question: is how can you say you didn't know when he's saying that the rumors are all over the place?
We only have about 15, 16 minutes left. We're talking to Steve Snyder Hill from survivorsofosu.com. He's written a book called Soldier of Change. So, Steve, we were discussing you wanted to bring out all the nefarious behaviors of OSU. Have you covered that yet, or is there more?
Okay, well, I will try to talk faster so you can get all this stuff. Yeah. So basically, I filed this complaint. OSU lost it, and I won a $25 settlement because that's how much it cost me to file. OSU had to pay me that. I didn't even cash. It's on that check is on my wall framed, because I'm so proud of that, because it was me defending myself. Trust the power of your voice, and I believe that. But then OSU's lawyer wrote me back while I was fighting them, because I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how to do this stuff. And she wrote me back and said one of my filings was not allowed in all caps. And so I was like, oh, God, did I do something wrong? So then I'm trying to figure out what I did. And technically, now I know this later, is that the way the court works is that they ask for stuff, and then you have to wait for them to ask for it before you file. But they ended up allowing it because it was my rebuttal to what they had said called out a lot of crazy stuff, because they told the court, and I'm not making this up, they told the court they didn't want to give me that documentation because they were afraid that it would traumatize me. Wow. That is such BS. I was like, how can you say that? So anyway, so she told me it was allowed, so I complained about that too, because I was like, that's like a lie. It was allowed. The court did allow it. And then she wrote back and said, oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke about that, but I sent it to my own legal team. I didn't mean to send it to you. So again, here's OSU telling me she's trying to make me believe that she hit reply to all and then somehow went through and deleted all of her fellow attorneys and then accidentally sent me that's not allowed email. It's just, they're just lies. And here's the best part, that when we did this, and I'm going to just it's not even breaking the rules, because I basically agreed to this in the beginning. We had a mediation before we did this court case for this documents. In the mediation, they said that this is confidential. And I said, wait a minute. And I did say this is like, I have a recording of this because I recorded the whole thing. They said it's confidential, and I released this later. But I said, I don't agree to confidentiality if I find out any laws are broken. And nobody disputed that. So I feel like that I'm within my right to make it not confidential anymore. That during that mediation, when I was telling them all this stuff and saying, I don't know why they waited 155 days, their lawyer lied to the court and said, we didn't even get his documentation back until right before the Perkins-Coie report released from Perkins-Coie. And so later, in the court filings, they had to put a chain of custody, and we find out that's not true. They had it a week after I asked for it. And then when I called them out on that, she said, oh, she misspoke. She meant to say we didn't get it back from our own legal department. So that's the kind of stuff that OSU's been doing. Rocky had talked about the House Bill 249, which was legislation that would help the survivors overcome the statute of limitations. OSU put in letterhead that it would be inappropriate for them, because this is what they do. They lie to the public. They put in letterhead it would be inappropriate for us to have a stance on this legislation when Dr. Drake, the OSU president, met with Householder behind the scenes secretly and got that bill killed. And then OSU, in their own documentation, behind the scenes, were bragging about how they had that legislation killed. And then they told the public, it would be inappropriate for us to have a stance on it. So it's just like that kind of shady stuff that they're doing. And then the other thing is that when this settlement program, now this is something I really want people to understand. Now I'm talking about the public settlement program because there is a private one that we're not allowed to discuss. This is the public one, and you can probably download these documents. Well, you can definitely download all these documents from our website, survivorsofosu.com. But this public settlement program, when they sent it to us, here's what it said. It said, you have to drop all your lawsuits. I'm paraphrasing. You have to drop all your lawsuits. You can't talk about settlement at all or what you get. There might be no settlement. You might get $0 from us. You have to agree to all this before you do any of this, too. So you might get $0. There might be no settlement. You can't talk about the settlement. You can't talk about if we gave you $0, nothing. Once you're enrolled in the program, you can't get out of it. And you can't ask for any Perkins Coie investigative materials, any more materials. You can't ask about anything else that happened. And you can't speak non-disparagingly about us from 2018 on about how we've acted.
Now, wait a second. Was this a settlement agreement?
No,
specific? Was this specific to Steve Snyder Hill?
Specifically said all this crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And so we were like, are you insane? Why would we do? You could give us the middle finger and not give us one bit of settlement, and we couldn't speak about it, and we can't talk bad about you.
Well, but wait, Steve, so was this just for you, or this was blanket for everybody?
No, this was everybody. This was the public settlement program. You can get on our website and download the actual documents so you can read it for yourself. So, of course, we were like, you're nuts. We're not going to do that. So then what OSU does is turns around and tells the public, we offered them the chance to settle, but they chose not to, making us seem like we're greedy. So that's the kind of crap that OSU has been doing, current day OSU, that's still in charge of other kids. Okay, and I'm not even done yet. Yeah. So here's my other list. Is that we've tried to talk to the Board of Trustees. We've done that every year we've talked to the Board of Trustees, and OSU's always been kind of crappy about it and tried to derail it. Well, the fourth year, they were just done with us, and they did not want to speak to us. So Ben Johnson, OSU spokesperson, just lied to an AT reporter because she asked, what's the status of Mr. Snyder Hill's request for you guys to come and speak to the board? And he said, OSU believed this request not to be active anymore based on our correspondence. And she called me and said, did you cancel your request? I was like, are you kidding me? So then I got so mad, and I got on there, and I basically railed against everybody. Well, we did get in to speak to them that year. But later, with the public records request, I got to see what he told her, which he lied. They lied to get us derailed. And then they turn around and tell people in a court filing, we've welcomed the survivors to speak to the board for a healing. That's the kind of crap that they've done. It's just insane. They just keep doing this stuff. And, I mean, the Board of Trustees, these Board of Trustees, and I want people to get up and Google them and look at their faces and know what companies they work for and what companies that they're attached to, because they've claimed publicly that they're going to do the right thing. They're committed to a fair and monetary resolution, that they've led to the effort to expose fraud. All these things are just lies. And it just keeps going on and on and on. And they've fought us now for 6 years. And so back when I told you 10% of my trauma was Strauss and 90% is OSU, I mean, the 4,000 times in their filing about the Perkins Coie report, they denied. They put the word deny 4,000 times, denied every single thing that we've said. So to this day, in their court filing, 4,000 times they've denied it, even though they paid $6 million to have a report when they thought they were protected under the statute of limitations. And then we won that under appeal, and then the Supreme Court rejected listening to it. And so once they realized that strategy wasn't going to work, what do you do if you're a liar? You pivot, and now they're saying, oh, well, we just think it was hearsay. And you're like, somebody needs to wake up and listen to this story. Because if you are, I would never send my kid to OSU. I would never trust them there. Because that's the type of people this board and these people are, and they're fighting us, and they're trying to make us. They tried to make Mike DeSabato look bad. They're trying to make us sound greedy, and now they're trying to say that we can't get emotional damage because of another court case that the Supreme Court ruled that you can't get emotional damage, and they're basically just spitting in our faces and saying, well, if you can't get emotional damage, then what do you really want? Do you have some doctor bills? What? And that's the way that they're acting toward us, and it's so gross. I mean, lawyers are probably a lot more, calm and
dispassionate. When you're not personally involved.
I'm not used to being sexually assaulted and having somebody treat me like this.
Well, a couple of things. Mike DeSabato, I can vouch for him. I've spoken to him several times off the air. We've never had him on the air, but this legit guy. A quick question about.
Well, he's not allowed now.
You know what? He was willing to though. You know what I mean? I just
he can't speak disparagingly about him because he signed that document.
Yeah, I know, but I could have pushed him. I could have got him on.
He's not allowed to say that.
I could have got him on here.
It's so crazy.
Because he said, man, he told, right after he signed that, he said he still wanted to come on here. I says, check it.
Well, I keep telling him he needs to be careful because honestly, the way that OSU is, if he signs something saying that he can't, and I even had a student reporter press them on that and say, what does non-disparaging mean? Like, can Steve say that you broke public records law because you did? Because it's proven in court. And he's like, he just got mad and said, well, they just can't speak non-disparagingly. Now, they just keep it super vague.
Did anybody agree to this public settlement program, like without an attorney? I guess it would be only people who didn't have an attorney who agreed to that.
No, there were some that did. But, I again, it's not – here's the thing is that – and some people did get a settlement. So I don't want to just act like that OSU made that settlement program and they were going to gyp everybody and not give them any settlement for the damages that they incurred. But I will say this, that there were a lot of people that did it. I think that some people regretted it. And I don't want to speak badly about the people that settled because, honestly, this has been a 6-year battle. So I think that people are just tired and exhausted. And I've spent thousands of hours going through this documentation and making this website. We pay for that ourselves. We've flown planes over the OSU thing. That's all paid for by survivors. So, just to get our story out there, we're using our own expenses and we're using our own voices and our own resources to do all that stuff.
Okay, so now let's say I was working for OSU in this litigation here. I would say, hey, this Stephen Snyder Hill, let's approach him and offer him, what's it going to take to get him to be nice to us and go away? Has anybody tried to approach you and make a deal with you?
So it's not just you. Every other university that's had this happen has chosen the same thing that you just said, is that this is embarrassing. Anybody else with a conscience would say, this looks terrible. We don't want to do this. I don't know what possesses OSU to just have the audacity to feel like that their reputation is so good that they can go and do this to people. And the documentary, the George Clooney documentary, is going to be out this year, hopefully by the end of this year, and it's going to trash them because it's and I don't even mean trash in a derogatory way. I mean, it's going to tell the truth. And they're not going to like the truth. They're not going to like it because they don't want that out.
Who's streaming that documentary? Not Netflix, I hope.
It's going to be HBO.
HBO, okay.
But you'll see me in it and hear some of this.
Oh, great, great. Yeah. Now, conditions in the locker room, because at one point they were allowing anybody who worked at OSU, gardeners, maintenance men, painters, whatever, could go use those locker rooms and use the gym facilities. Has that policy changed?
So the center now is totally different. They actually, and again, this is weird, and I don't want to be conspiratorial because everything that I've said now, as crazy as it all sounds, is all completely. You can go through our website, and I have all the proof to everything. You can download the documents that corroborate everything that I've said. What I'm saying, I will tell you is speculation, and I'll say that whenever I'm speculating. But they tore down Larkins Hall, and I think that there was a little bit more than just tearing it down because it was a decrepitated building. It's like a memory erase, and I feel like that as bad as everything happened there, that tearing down that building is probably, for somebody who has the resources they do, is probably the best option for them to get rid of it. But so I'm sure that now OSU has different. And I'm not giving them a buy in any way, saying the 90s were a different time because none of this was ever acceptable. But there are definitely more eyes on them now. They have, people can have social media. I think that they have to be very careful. Although I'll say, even though that I say that, and people should be confident thinking their kids would be protected, they've had a band controversy where this band leader had a sexual culture that, he ended up getting fired. They had a diver that had, like a underage, situation that happened. They've had some football players that had some rape allegations. I mean, so OSU hasn't learned. Like, they'll tell you, here's all the things that we've done. They even said that they did a sexual assault task force after us. And I have great audio from all of our local news channels that was like, they didn't really give any specifics. We don't really know what they're doing or what this is designed to do. It sounds great, and then they act like they're going to be the leader in the sexual assault task force. Well, at the end of the day, what it was 3 Zooms, I think, where people came in and did a presentation, and then they wrote a report summarizing what they learned in the Zooms. But that's all it was meant to be, is a PR thing. And then the one thing that I did not say that is probably the most egregious thing that I think they did was that in 2018, when this was all breaking and Mike was, people were thinking he might be lying and they were kind of painting him as a liar. In 2018, OSU released Strauss's clean personnel file to the public. Now, when they were fighting me in court, one of the things they kept saying is we don't want to piecemeal release information because that could be traumatizing to people, and that's why we're not piecemeal releasing anything, and that's how they justified lying to me in court and trying to keep my public records. But here's the thing. They didn't mind piecemeal releasing his clean personnel file that somehow, out of the thousands of documents that talked about him raping people and sexual assault and them lying and all that stuff, didn't make one of those documents into his personnel file. So I think people need to be outraged and go back and say, you need to explain that, OSU, because now we have thousands of documents. Now you have a freaking school report, $6 million, saying that you knew. And here's the thing. They released that document when they were fighting me not to give me my documents. So if you want, this isn't conspiratorial. If you want to know what their intentions are, that's right there laid out. They knew that I had documents. I threatened them saying, if I find this in my basement before you give it to me, you're going to be in big trouble. They knew what it said because their investigative team told me, we're so glad you came forward. We have your documentation. So they had it. But then they released his clean personnel file. So they were trying to lie their way out of it in 2018. So nothing's changed in 40 years at OSU. If another sexual assault predator comes along, it's going to be the same thing.
Well, on that note, we're out of time. Steve Snyder Hill, thank you so much, man. This is great information. You present this incredibly well. And we're going to be doing a series of shows on this, and I'd love to have you back talking about your experience in the Army. SurvivorsofOSU.com. Steve Snyder Hill, you can find him on Twitter. Retired Army Major. Soldier of Change is a book he put out. Mr. Snyder Hill, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Good night.